In the summer of 1906, 6 members of a wealthy banker's household contracted typhoid fever while vacationing in the high society enclave of Oyster Bay. The outbreak baffled the medical community. At the time, typhoid was viewed as a disease of the crowded slums, associated with poverty and poor sanitation. Seeing it strike a privileged summer estate was an anomaly that threatened the local property values. A sanitary engineer systematically ruled out the plumbing and the local shellfish before finding a human lead. A cook had arrived at the house just 3 weeks before the infections began and left shortly after. The investigator suspected that her signature dessert, raw peaches and ice cream, had served as the perfect cold vehicle for the bacteria. It introduced a radical new dilemma for the state. If an entirely healthy person unknowingly carries a lethal disease, what can the government legally do to them? The investigator tracked Mary Mallon's employment history through various wealthy households. In every job she held over the previous decade, typhoid outbreaks followed, leaving a trail of 22 infections and at least 1 death. In March 1907, the investigator confronted Mallon in a Manhattan kitchen. When he explained that she was making people sick and demanded samples of her blood and waste, Mallon seized a carving fork and chased him out of the house. Identifying Mallon was an essential test for a new theory in bacteriology. It provided the first evidence in America that a person could be a healthy carrier, someone whose body breeds and spreads a pathogen while remaining entirely unaffected herself. But Mallon saw no science here. She saw a stranger accusing her of being unclean and spreading a disease she had never even contracted. The health department eventually sent a medical inspector and 5 police officers to apprehend her. Mallon fought so fiercely that she had to be physically dragged into an ambulance and restrained for the entire journey. When her tests came back positive, the city moved her to North Brother Island. They placed a perfectly healthy woman in a quarantine facility, surrounded by patients dying of contagious infections. In 1909, Mallon sued for her freedom. Her lawyer argued that she was being held indefinitely without a trial or a criminal charge, effectively turning a medical quarantine into a life sentence. The state's defense was absolute. Public safety takes precedence over individual liberty when a person is an active biological threat to the community. While the case was pending, Mallon began bypassing the health department's doctors. She started secretly sending her own physical samples to an independent private laboratory on the mainland. Every single one of her private tests came back negative. This cemented Mallon's conviction that the government was fabricating their findings to keep her imprisoned. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled against her. The decision codified the government's power to isolate healthy carriers indefinitely without the standard protections of due process. A year later, a new health commissioner offered Mallon a deal. She would be released if she signed an affidavit promising to change her occupation and never work as a cook again. Mallon took a job as a laundress, but the transition was grueling. She went from being a respected, well-paid cook to performing back-breaking labor for a fraction of her former wages. Sometime after 1912, Mallon stopped reporting to the health department and disappeared from their records. In 1915, a typhoid outbreak erupted at a Manhattan maternity hospital. 25 staff members fell ill and 2 died. Investigators found that the hospital's recently hired cook, Mrs. Brown, was actually Mary Mallon, working under an alias. This breach of trust turned the public against her. What was once seen as a tragic medical isolation was now viewed as a callous violation of the law that had put mothers and newborns at risk. Mallon returned to North Brother Island without a fight. She was no longer a medical rarity. By 1915, the health department had identified hundreds of other healthy carriers living across New York. This chart compares Mallon against Tony Labella, another healthy carrier. Labella infected over 100 people, twice as many as Mallon, and caused 5 deaths. Despite this higher toll, the state isolated Labella for only 2 weeks, letting him remain a free man for lice. The difference was compliance. Labella agreed to leave the food industry and kept his word. Mallon's life sentence was the result of her refusal to accept her carrier status. Mallon lived out her final 23 years on the island. She eventually found a quiet role in the hospital's laboratory, washing the very glassware used to test for infectious diseases. She remained bedridden for 6 years after a stroke and died in 1938. In the end, the state allowed hundreds of other carriers to walk the streets freely, provided they cooperated with monitoring. Mary Mallon was dangerous to her community, and she was unfairly targeted by her government. Her story endures because both of those facts are true, leaving a paradox that our legal and medical systems still struggle to resolve.